It was just after sunset when I heard the knock on my front door. 3 sharp raps that cut straight through the sound of the ocean outside. I almost ignored it, thinking it was a neighbor or some kid selling something, but something in the rhythm made me stand still, kettle hissing faintly on the stove behind me. When I opened the door, there was a man I had never seen before, his jacket damp from the sea air, eyes steady but tired. He looked at me and said only 6 words. He told me you'd keep your promise. I froze right there on the threshold. My first thought was that I had misheard him. But no. The words were clear, soft, deliberate. He told me you'd keep your promise. My chest tightened as if the night air had turned suddenly cold. Who was he? My late husband, Martin, has been gone for 3 years. 3 years of silence, of loneliness, of routines I stitched together just to keep going. And yet here was this stranger, speaking of a promise Martin had apparently left behind. "What did you just say?" I asked, maybe too sharply, my fingers gripping the edge of the door. The man repeated it, word for word, like a phrase he had practiced. Then he added, "Martin said you would understand. He said, you'd offer shelter if I asked." For a moment I thought I might faint. I wanted to slam the door, to shut out this impossible, cruel intrusion. But instead I found myself staring at his face, searching for some clue, some resemblance, some proof. He looked younger than Martin would have been, maybe mid-40s, with lines that spoke of long nights and harder days. "You knew Martin?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. "I met him once," the man said. "A long time ago. He told me about this place. He told me that if I ever needed it, I should come here. No questions, just a month by the sea." The kettle screamed behind me and I let it cry, too stunned to move. Every instinct told me to shut the door, call the police, demand answers, but another voice inside, quieter and deeper, whispered that Martin had left me something I had not yet discovered. "I don't know who you are," I managed finally. "And I don't know what kind of game this is, but you can't just show up here and—" He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just stepped back onto the porch, lowered his eyes and said, "I'll wait." Then he sat down on the steps like a man who had nowhere else to go. I closed the door slowly, heart hammering, and leaned against it. My eyes drifted across the kitchen to the small brass key that had hung on its hook since Martin died. The key to the old lockbox we never spoke of. My hand trembled as I reached for it. My name is Evelyn Hart, and I am 62 years old. If you ask the people in town, they'd probably tell you I am the quiet woman who lives in the old cottage on the bluff, the one with peeling blue shutters and roses that climb stubbornly against the salt wind. To me, that cottage is more than walls and windows. It is the last living thread to Martin. We called it Gull Song because every morning the gulls would perch on the roof and cry as though they were singing directly to us. He loved that name. Since Martin's passing, my days have taken on a kind of rhythm that is both comforting and unbearably lonely. I wake with the light, brew tea in the same chipped pot we bought at a flea market 30 years ago, and sit by the window with my journal. I write down the tides, the weather, fragments of dreams I can't quite shake. I tend the small garden, fuss over the roses, walk the beach collecting shells. In the evenings I read, usually with the sound of the kettle hissing nearby, and sometimes I talk aloud, pretending Martin is still in his chair across from me, nodding and smiling with that patient kindness that carried me through so many storms. But there is another rhythm that interrupts my peace. My daughter, Maya. She calls every week, sometimes more, her voice brisk and practical. "Mum, you can't keep living out there alone. That cottage is worth a fortune. The developer is offering you more money than you'll ever need. Sell it, move closer to me, enjoy retirement." She makes it sound so simple, so reasonable. I know she loves me. I know she worries. But what she doesn't understand is that selling Gull Song would feel like cutting the last thread between me and Martin. Every floorboard creak carries his memory. The porch where we strung fairy lights for our anniversary, the kitchen table where we made life's biggest decisions, the window seat where he once whispered, "Promise me this place will always be a refuge." How could I give that up no matter the price? The developer, Seabrook Holdings, sleek men in tailored suits, sends glossy brochures with shiny renderings of condominiums where our dunes stand now. They talk about progress, about opportunity. But when I look at those pictures, I don't see opportunity. I see erasure. I see the sea stripped of its song, the cottage erased from the map of memory. So I nod when Maya talks. I let her think I am considering it. But deep inside, my vow is iron. Gull Song will not be sold. Not to them. Not to anyone. It belongs to the memories, to the promises, to the quiet shelter that Martin and I built together. And now, perhaps it belongs to something more, something I don't yet understand. The next morning, when I opened the door, he was still there, sitting on the porch steps like a man carved out of stone. His jacket was stiff with salt, his hair tangled by the wind. But his eyes were steady, waiting. I had half expected him to be gone, some trick of a dream, but no. He stood as soon as he saw me, respectful, not a hint of threat in his movements. "I don't know who you are," I said firmly, pulling the screen door a little tighter between us. "But you can't stay here. This isn't some charity house. Whatever you think Martin promised you, he never told me about it." The man nodded, as if he had expected my resistance. "My name is Caleb," he said quietly. "And Martin called this place Gull Song. He told me it was where he found his anchor when he thought he might lose everything." Hearing that name, Gull Song, from a stranger's lips made my stomach drop. I gripped the doorframe, forcing my voice to stay calm. "A lot of people know that name," I said. "It's not proof of anything." Caleb's gaze didn't falter. "Then ask me something only Martin would have told me." My mind raced. A test, then. Something buried. Something secret. "What did Martin keep in the cedar box under the bed?" I demanded. Caleb's answer was immediate. "Blue envelopes. He said they held the kind of truths that wait for their right time. He told me if I ever came here, you would understand what they meant." The porch seemed to tilt beneath me. The blue envelopes? Only Martin and I had ever spoken of them, and even then, only in whispers. He had called them his unfinished chapters. For Caleb to know, they had to have spoken, truly spoken. I felt my throat tighten. If you know about the envelopes, then you know this isn't something I can just accept at face value. For all I know, you could have read about it, stolen it, I don't know. You could be playing some cruel game. Caleb lifted his hands slightly, palms open. "I don't want to take anything from you, Evelyn. I only ask for what Martin promised. A month of quiet, a roof, nothing more. If you say no, I'll go. But if you let me stay, you'll see why he trusted me." The wind chime clinked above us, a thin, haunting sound. I studied him, searching for the smallest twitch of deceit. Instead, I saw a kind of tired patience, the look of a man who had been waiting a long time to be believed. Finally, I whispered, "I need time." Caleb gave a small nod, stepped back from the door and sat once more on the porch steps, as though he were prepared to wait forever. That evening, long after Caleb had settled himself silently on the porch, I stood in my kitchen staring at the brass key that had hung untouched since Martin's death. My hand trembled as I lifted it from the hook. The old lockbox was kept at the back of the bedroom closet, hidden beneath spare blankets I never used. I hadn't opened it in years, not since Martin's funeral when I placed his wedding band inside and locked it away. The key turned with a stiff click, and the lid creaked open, releasing a faint smell of cedar and dust. Inside was not just the ring I remembered, but something more. 5 envelopes, each the same faded shade of ocean blue, stacked neatly and tied together with twine. On top rested a folded paper, Martin's handwriting instantly recognizable, firm and looping. My breath caught as I unfolded it. Just one line stared back at me. "If someone speaks the 6 words, offer shelter. Trust the chain. It saved me once, and it will save again. I pressed the paper to my chest, shaking my head in disbelief. So it was true. Martin had prepared for this. He had kept a secret from me all these years, one he had carried to his grave. Anger bubbled beneath my grief. How could he not tell me? We had promised each other no secrets, not after everything we survived together. And yet here I was, standing over a box of them. I untied the twine and spread the envelopes on the bed. They were numbered 1 through 5 in Martin's hand. My fingers hovered, aching to rip them all open, to devour every word he had hidden. But something in his message, "Trust the chain," made me pause. Perhaps they were meant to be opened in time, like stepping stones laid across a river. With a deep breath, I slid open the first envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed slightly at the edges. Martin's voice came alive as my eyes traced the words. He spoke of a night years ago when despair had nearly swallowed him, when he was drinking too much and ready to give up everything. A stranger had offered him shelter, no questions asked, for 1 month. That month saved my life, he wrote. I swore I would pass the gift forward. If you are reading this, Evelyn, the time has come. I sank onto the bed, the letter trembling in my hands, resentment tangled with sorrow, but underneath them both was a thread of something else, curiosity and the faintest glimmer of trust. I folded the letter carefully, returned the others to the box and whispered into the quiet room. What have you done, Martin? The phone buzzed just as I was setting the kettle back on the stove. Maya's name glowed on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it ring, but guilt got the better of me. I answered with my best, cheerful voice. Hello, sweetheart. Mom, Maya began, brisk and businesslike, I just got off the phone with Seabrook Holdings. They've raised their offer again. You could be set for the rest of your life. You'd never have to worry about another bill, about maintenance, about... I cut her off gently. Maya, I'm fine here. The house is fine. I don't need their money. She sighed, a heavy exhale that carried all the distance between us. Mum, you're living alone in an old cottage by the sea. You've got creaky stairs and a leaky roof and no one nearby if something happens. I know you love that place, but it's just a house. You can't keep clinging to it forever. Just a house. The words pierced me like thorns. I looked around at the kitchen, at Martin's chair, still angled toward the window, at the tide clock ticking softly on the wall, at the map of the shoreline where he had drawn tiny notes in pencil. This was not just a house. I'm not clinging, I said quietly. I'm living. There's a difference. But Maya pushed on. They're serious, Mum. The rezoning vote is in 2 weeks. If it passes, property values will skyrocket, but so will taxes. You'll be forced out anyway, and then you'll have nothing. Why not accept the offer now on your own terms? Think about it. It's not just about you. That money could help me, help the baby. We could finally breathe a little. Her words twisted the knife. I heard the strain in her voice, the unspoken panic beneath the argument. She wasn't wrong. I knew her mortgage was heavy, the medical bills after the birth, the cost of daycare. I wanted to help. I always wanted to help. But how could I explain that giving up Gulsong felt like tearing away the last piece of Martin I had left? I swallowed the truth burning in my throat. About Caleb on the porch. About the blue envelopes waiting upstairs. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Maya, I hear you. I do. But my answer hasn't changed. There was silence on the line. Then her voice, sharp with hurt. Then don't say I didn't try to save you from yourself. The call ended. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, the kettle just beginning to hum again, my heart pulled between my daughter's fear and my husband's promise. For the first time, I wondered if I could hold both without breaking. On the third evening, after circling the house like a restless gull, I finally opened the door and looked Caleb straight in the eye. 3 nights, I told him. That's all. You follow my rules, you keep to yourself, and you leave when I say so. Do you understand? His relief was so sharp it was almost painful to watch. He nodded quickly. Yes, Evelyn, Thank you. I promise I'll respect whatever rules you set. I stepped aside reluctantly, letting the screen door creak open. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air in the cottage shifted, like someone had turned a page in a book I wasn't sure I wanted to read. I laid out the boundaries over the hiss of the stove pilot. No wandering into my bedroom, no touching the lockbox upstairs, no unexpected visitors. You cook your own meals, you clean up after yourself, and you treat this house with the respect it deserves. I understand, Caleb said, and there was no hint of sarcasm in his voice. He set his bag down gently by the door, as though he already knew this place was sacred. At first I hovered, waiting for him to stumble, waiting for some flaw to surface, but instead he moved through the rooms with uncanny familiarity. When the kettle squealed, he reached for the handle without hesitation. When the back door stuck in its frame, he nudged it at just the right angle. He even adjusted the tide clock on the wall with a tap that Martin used to swear by. "How do you know that?" I demanded, suspicion rising again. Caleb met my gaze calmly. "Martin showed me, years ago. I came here once, just for a day. He said this house was his compass, and he wanted me to see what it meant to live anchored. I never forgot." I didn't answer, but my chest tightened. Later, when I was searching through a drawer of old receipts and photographs, I found proof. A sun-faded snapshot, half buried under postcards, showing Martin at the community market in town. And beside him, Caleb. Younger, yes, but unmistakably him. Laughing at something Martin was holding up, both of them caught in an unguarded moment of joy. I sat at the table with the photo pressed to my palm, torn between anger at Martin's secrecy and the strange comfort of knowing he had once chosen this man to share even a sliver of our world. When I returned to the kitchen, Caleb was rinsing his cup, quiet and careful. He looked up only once, as if to ask with his eyes whether I had found what I needed. I didn't answer. But I didn't ask him to leave, either. The next morning I decided I needed the comfort of routine, so I walked into town and slipped into the little cafe by the harbour. The place smelled of espresso and warm muffins, the kind of scent that used to cling to Martin's coat when he'd come here early to read the paper. I ordered tea, took a seat near the window and tried to steady my thoughts. But peace wasn't what I found. Instead, the air hummed with conversation. At the next table, two fishermen in heavy boots were arguing. "Nor'easter's coming in hard," one muttered, tapping the weather report on his phone. "Could be the worst in a decade." His friend shrugged. "We've seen worse. What worries me is that council meeting next week. If Seabrook gets that rezoning passed, kiss public beach access, goodbye." I froze mid-sip, the porcelain trembling against my lips. I leaned slightly closer, pretending to study the chalkboard that read Stormwatch in one corner and Town Council Agenda in another. "They're promising jobs, money, all that slick talk," the fisherman continued. "But what they really want is to fence off half the shoreline, make it private for condo owners. The rest of us? We'll be left standing on rocks." A woman behind me chimed in, her voice sharp. "Well, maybe it's about time this town got some real investment. We can't keep living in the past." "People like Evelyn Hart can afford to cling to their ocean views, but some of us need work." I stiffened at the sound of my own name but didn't turn. My cheeks burned, caught between shame and fury. I wanted to stand up to tell her that Gull Song wasn't a luxury. It was a legacy, a promise. But I stayed silent, letting her words settle like grit in my chest. At the counter, the barista turned up the little radio. The announcer spoke over static. "Residents are urged to prepare for high winds and possible flooding as the nor'easter approaches. Town officials confirm that the rezoning vote is still scheduled for next week despite weather concerns." The cafe buzzed with divided voices, half anxious about the storm, half debating the future of our coastline. For the first time, I realized the battle over my cottage was part of something larger, something that would change the soul of the town itself. When I left, the sky was already bruising with grey. I clutched my coat tighter around me and made a quiet vow. I would go to that hearing. I would speak, even if my voice shook. Gull Song was not just my fight anymore. It was the towns, the seas, the memory of everything Martin had held dear. That evening, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady against the windows, the kind of rhythm that makes a house feel smaller and more intimate. Caleb was in the kitchen, quietly making himself tea, and I retreated upstairs with the lockbox balanced in my lap. My hands shook as I untied the twine around the second envelope. The paper inside was thinner than the first, yellowed at the edges as if it had been waiting far too long to be read. Martin's handwriting swept across the page, strong but more uneven than I remembered. I heard his voice in my head as the words came alive. Evelyn, there is something I never told you. Long before we met, when I was at my lowest, I nearly let the sea take me. I was drowning in drink, in grief, in debts I couldn't pay. One night, after a fight I can't even remember starting, I walked until I collapsed outside a stranger's door. I should have been turned away, or arrested, or left to ruin. Instead, a man opened his home to me. He didn't ask for explanations, he didn't demand apologies. He just gave me a room, a roof, and silence. For 1 month, he sheltered me, and that month saved my life. I pressed my palm against the page, my throat tightening. He never asked me for anything except one thing, that I pass it on. That if I ever met someone desperate, broken, in need of shelter, I would give them what had been given to me. I didn't know how I would keep such a promise. Then I found you, Evelyn, and I thought maybe I never would. But the promise stayed inside me, waiting. I need you to understand. This was not a secret kept from you out of shame, but out of gratitude. You were my salvation. And one day, someone will knock on your door and you will know. Please, pass it on. Tears blurred the ink. I whispered into the stillness. Oh, Martin. The anger that had been building inside me for days, at his secrecy, at the burden he left, began to soften. This wasn't about hiding the truth from me. This was about carrying something he believed was sacred. The rain beat harder against the glass, but inside the room the lamplight glowed warm and steady. I folded the letter carefully, laid it on the stack, and, for the first time since Caleb appeared, I felt a quiet shift inside me. Maybe Martin had known what he was doing after all. Maybe trust was the legacy he wanted me to keep. I wasn't expecting Maya so soon, but on Saturday morning I heard the crunch of tyres on the gravel drive and then the squeak of a stroller wheel. By the time I reached the door, she was already on the porch, cheeks flushed from the sea air, the baby bundled against her chest. Her eyes darted past me into the hallway where Caleb's jacket hung neatly on the peg. "Mom," she said sharply, "who's staying here?" The question was an accusation. She pushed past me before I could answer, taking in the shoes by the door, the mug in the sink, the folded blanket on the sofa. "Unbelievable, you've let a stranger into the house and you didn't even tell me." "Maya, please," I began, keeping my voice calm. "His name is Caleb. He's only here for a short while." She turned on me, fury mixing with exhaustion in her face. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? You live out here alone and you just let some man move in? While I'm begging you to sell this place so you can be safe?" The baby stirred at her raised voice and she shifted her arms, patting gently. Tears welled suddenly in her eyes. "You think I don't care, but I do. I'm drowning, Mom. The mortgage, the medical bills, the daycare wait list. I lie awake every night wondering how we'll make it through the next month. And then I hear you're letting some stranger stay here rent-free while you sit on a property worth millions." Her words landed heavy, sharper than any lawyer's pitch. I reached for her arm, but she pulled away. "Maya," I said softly, "I know you're scared. I know things are hard, but this house isn't just a property. It's the last piece of your father. And Caleb, he's not what you think. He needed shelter, and I—" She cut me off with a bitter laugh. "So now you're running a charity out of Dad's shrine? That's what this is?" Before I could answer, a sharp slap rattled the door. We both turned. A flyer had been tacked to the wood, the paper bright red against the weathered paint. Across the top in bold letters, notice of proposed eviction, rezoning pending. Maya's face went pale. "They're serious," she whispered. "They'll take this place whether you sell or not." I pulled the paper free, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "Then we'll fight." For a moment she stared at me, torn between anger and fear. The baby whimpered, and she kissed the top of his head. "I don't know if you're brave, Mom, or just blind." She left soon after, stroller wheels squeaking down the path, leaving me on the porch with the notice crumpled in my fist and Caleb's shadow lingering in the doorway behind me. That night the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat. Caleb sat at the kitchen table with his hands folded, eyes lowered, as though he were waiting for permission to speak. Finally he lifted his gaze to mine. "I owe you the truth, Evelyn," he said. His voice was steady but carried the weight of old battles. "Years ago I was lost. Addiction had me by the throat. I burned every bridge, lied to every friend, pushed away my family. I was headed for the same grave Martin said he once stood at the edge of." The mention of Martin's name made me stiffen, but I didn't interrupt. "I met him at a recovery meeting," Caleb continued. "I was hungover, bitter, ready to walk out. And then Martin stood up. He talked about a man who once gave him shelter with no questions asked. He said that sometimes what saves you isn't advice or money. It's a roof, a safe chair, a cup of coffee when you can't trust yourself to hold steady." I didn't believe him then. But afterward he found me outside, smoking, shaking. He looked me in the eye and said, "Someday, Caleb, you'll carry this forward. You'll pass it on." His voice cracked, and for the first time I saw the boy behind the man, fragile and raw. I've been sober 6 years now, and I've tried to keep that promise. I don't need your money, Evelyn. I don't want your house. I just need a place for one night, a circle, a handful of people who are struggling the way I once was. I'd like to invite them here, just once, to sit together, to breathe, to remember that storms can be survived. The request hung in the air like smoke. I looked around the kitchen, at the table where Martin and I had celebrated birthdays, argued over bills, mapped our life together. The thought of strangers sitting here spilling their brokenness onto these worn floorboards unsettled me. This house was sacred. But then again, wasn't that exactly why it mattered? I drew a long breath, steadying myself. "One night," I said at last. "One circle. I'll make the coffee, but after that, you're responsible. And when it's over, you and your people treat this place with the respect it deserves." Relief flooded his face so suddenly that it almost hurt to watch. He nodded quickly, eyes bright. "You won't regret it, Evelyn. I promise." I wasn't so sure. But as he struck a match to light the candle in the centre of the table, I felt Martin's presence so strongly it was as if he were sitting between us, smiling quietly in approval. The following evening the rain returned, steady and patient, drumming on the roof as if urging the house to stay awake. By 7 o'clock the first knock came. Then another. One by one they entered. 5 people, strangers to me, each carrying the same weary look in their eyes, the look of someone who has walked too long in the dark. Caleb greeted them quietly, guiding them into the living room where chairs had been arranged in a circle around the coffee table. I had set out mugs and a pot of coffee, the smell warm and familiar, a small comfort against the storm. I stayed at the edge of the room at first, arms folded, watching. They sat, shifted nervously, cleared their throats. Then Caleb lit a candle in the centre of the table and spoke. "This is Gull Song," he said gently, "a place built on promise. Tonight, it belongs to all of us. No judgment, no questions, just stories." The first to speak was a woman with silver hair pulled back in a braid. She cradled her mug like it was the only steady thing in her life. "My son doesn't answer my calls anymore," she said. I drank through every birthday, every holiday. I've been sober 4 months, but he won't look at me. I don't know how to show him I'm trying. Her voice broke, but no one interrupted. Next was a young man, barely 30, his hands trembling as he spoke. I lost my job after my third relapse. I thought my wife was done with me, but last week she left a note on my pillow that said, "Try again. I'll be here." That note is the only reason I'm still breathing. Their words filled the room like tide water, each confession flowing into the next. I found myself sitting down quietly in an empty chair, listening not as a skeptic, but as a witness. The stories weren't polished or dramatic, they were raw, simple, true. And in them I felt something stirring, the recognition that pain is universal. But so is the need for shelter. When the circle returned to silence, Caleb looked around at them with quiet pride. "This house has held storms before," he said softly. "Tonight it holds us. That's enough." I looked at the faces around me, lit by the candle's glow, rain streaking the windows like silver threads. For the first time, I understood gull song not as a relic of the past, but as a harbour. Martin had been right. A roof, a chair, a cup of coffee. Sometimes that's the only bridge back to hope. I wrapped my hands around my mug and whispered to myself, this is what it was meant for. The town hall smelled of damp coats and old wood polish, the storm rattling against the windows as neighbours shuffled into folding chairs. At the front, under the buzzing lights, sat the council members, their faces set in polite indifference. Beside them stood Seabrook's attorney, a tall, polished man in a charcoal suit, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. He spoke first, of course, projecting confidence with every syllable. "Seabrook Holdings is committed to the prosperity of this town," he declared, pointing to glossy renderings displayed on an easel. "Jobs, modern housing, increased tax revenue. This is progress, and progress waits for no one." Murmurs rippled through the room, some nodding, some frowning. The attorney gestured toward the storm outside. "Even nature is reminding us that the old ways are fragile. We must build stronger, smarter, together." One by one, residents stood to speak. The fishermen argued about losing public access. A teacher worried about students priced out of their hometown. A shop owner welcomed the promise of new customers. Voices clashed like waves against rocks, the storm outside echoing the storm within. My palms sweated as I clutched Martin's second letter inside my bag. I wasn't sure why I'd brought it. Perhaps for courage, perhaps as proof to myself. When the council chair finally said, "Last comment, Mrs. Hart," my knees nearly buckled. I walked slowly to the podium, the room blurring around me. My voice quivered at first but steadied as I spoke. "My name is Evelyn Hart. My husband and I made our life in the cottage on the bluff, the one you call Parcel 12 on your maps. To you it may look like prime real estate. To me it is something different." I unfolded Martin's letter, holding it up though no one else could read. Years ago, a stranger sheltered my husband for 1 month when he had nothing. That kindness saved his life. He asked me to continue that chain, to keep our home as a place of refuge. I believe some things like shelter, like shoreline, are not meant to be bought and sold. The room was hushed now, only the thunder rolling outside filling the silence. "I ask you," I continued, "not just to weigh profits, but to remember what kind of community we want to be. Do we close doors, or do we open them?" The gavel rapped, the chair cleared his throat. Due to weather concerns, tonight's vote will be postponed until further notice. Murmurs rose immediately, half relieved, half impatient. As I stepped away, my heart pounded. No victory, no defeat, just a storm stretching the tension a little longer. But I had spoken, and that mattered. By nightfall, the storm had grown teeth. Wind howled through the eaves, rain lashed sideways against the windows, and the sea roared so loud it felt as if it were battering the very walls. I lit the oil lanterns, their glow soft and uncertain, just as the power flickered once, twice, and died. The house shuddered into darkness, the refrigerator clicking silent, the tide clock stilled at a frozen moment in time. Caleb appeared with a flashlight, his voice calm but urgent. "Generator?" "In the shed," I said, grabbing my coat. Together we fought the wind, leaning against gusts that nearly knocked us from our feet. The little generator coughed to life on the third try, its hum like a fragile heartbeat in the storm. When we returned inside, a pounding rattled the front door. Neighbours, 2, then 4, then a dozen, faces pale, hair plastered to their foreheads. A family with children, an elderly couple clutching each other, a young man carrying his dog wrapped in a blanket. Their voices rose in frightened pleas, roofs leaking, windows shattered, roads already flooding. Without hesitation, Caleb and I ushered them in. "Spread out, make space," I called, moving instinctively, shoving furniture against the walls, spreading quilts and blankets across the floor. Gull song filled with bodies and voices, the air alive with both fear and relief. The living room became a dormitory, the kitchen a soup line, the porch a dripping collection of boots. In the attic, I dusted off an old ham radio Martin and I once used for fun on stormy nights. My fingers remembered the knobs, the static, the careful tuning. "This is Heart House, Gull Song Bluff," I said into the crackling silence. "We have shelter, 20 souls accounted for, supplies holding, over." The reply came faint but steady. "Copy that, Heart House. Stay put, Coast Guard stretched thin. You're a hub now. Relay what you see." I straightened, the responsibility pressing against my chest. A hub. Gull Song had never held so much weight. Hours blurred. The lantern light glowed on damp faces. Spoons clinked against mugs of hastily brewed tea. Children dozed under quilts while thunder rattled the glass. Every time fear threatened to rise, I forced myself into motion, checking the generator, guiding neighbours, pressing the radio key to send another update. At one point, I caught Caleb's eye across the crowded room. He gave a small nod as if to say, "This is what Martin meant." And for the first time in years, I felt it too. This house alive, not just with memory, but with purpose, holding fast against the storm as though it had been waiting for this very night. The morning after the storm, the air was raw with salt and silence. Gull Song still stood, battered but unbroken, while neighbours stirred in makeshift beds, stretching stiff limbs and murmuring gratitude. Caleb and I walked down to the beach, boots sinking deep into soaked sand. What we found there took my breath away. The seawall Seabrook Holdings had begun constructing was in ruins, great chunks of concrete scattered like broken teeth, steel rods bent and twisted, sand gouged into unnatural channels that funneled the surge straight into town. Houses near the harbour had taken the worst of it, waterlogged and splintered, and people stood in shock along the street, staring at what had been lost. By noon, the news crews arrived, cameras panning across the wreckage. A reporter's microphone popped in the wind as she spoke into the lens. Residents claim the half-built seawall redirected storm surge, amplifying the flooding. Some are now questioning whether Seabrook's promises of safety were nothing more than salesmanship. I stood in the crowd, listening as neighbours vented their anger. "They said the wall would protect us," one fisherman shouted, "but it tore our harbour open." Another held up photographs of her ruined shop. The shelves collapsed under seawater. When a camera turned my way, I tried to step back, but someone pointed. "That's Evelyn Hart. Her house sheltered half the neighbourhood last night." Suddenly the microphone was in front of me, the reporter's eyes bright with curiosity. "Mrs. Hart, can you tell us what happened?" I swallowed, nerves prickling, but the words came steady. "Gull Song is an old house. It's weathered storms before. Last night it held 20 people safe, neighbours who had nowhere else to go when the surge came. We didn't ask questions. We just opened the door." The reporter nodded, leaning in. "And what do you think about Seabrook's seawall project?" I glanced at the ruins littering the beach, then back at the crowd. I think strength doesn't come from walls. It comes from community, from keeping doors open, not closing them. A murmur of agreement rose behind me, hands clapping my shoulders, voices calling, "Yes, that's right." For the first time in a long while, I felt the tide turning. Not against me, but with me. By evening, volunteers were forming bucket lines, hauling debris, sharing food, helping one another repair what they could. The glossy brochures of condos seemed absurd now, relics of a false promise. Seabrook was on the defensive, their polished words drowned out by the sound of neighbours rallying together. And Gullsong, once a private refuge, was now whispered about in town as something larger, as if the old cottage itself had risen to take the moral high ground. That night, after the neighbours had returned to their homes and the storm had passed on to punish some other stretch of coast, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the lockbox. My hands lingered on the cool metal, the weight of it heavier than the years it had sat untouched. There were still 3 unopened envelopes inside, but the one numbered 3 seemed to pulse in the lamplight, calling to me. I slit it open with the brass key and unfolded the paper. Martin's handwriting, strong but hurried, filled the page. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means the chain has continued. And if it has, then it's time you knew what I never could explain when I was alive. The month I spent in that stranger's house, when I was at my lowest, when I thought the sea might take me, it was the only roof that ever felt like mine. Because it wasn't mine. It was given. Do you understand? Ownership is an illusion. What we give is what stays with us. The gift you don't keep, that's the one you truly own." I stopped, pressing the paper to my chest, my breath unsteady. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had spent years gripping Gullsong with white knuckles, convinced that if I let go, even a little, I would lose Martin entirely. Every board, every tide clock tick, every photograph was proof he had lived, proof that I had loved him. But here was his truth, laid bare in ink. He had never asked me to protect Gullsong as a relic. He had asked me to let it breathe, to let it shelter as he had once been sheltered. I wept then. A raw sound pulled from somewhere deep. All the loneliness of widowhood, all the fear of being forgotten, all the anger at his secrets. It broke open and washed through me like the storm surge, but when it ebbed, something softer remained. The kettle began to sing on the stove, its whistle high and steady. I rose, poured myself a cup of tea, and stared at the words again. The gift you don't keep. For the first time I understood. Gullsong was not Martin's tombstone, nor my anchor of grief. It was our offering, a place consecrated not by walls, but by the choice to open them. I placed the letter back into the envelope, my hands steadier now, and whispered into the quiet kitchen. "All right, my love. I'll keep the promise. I'll give it away." 2 mornings later, I found myself sitting in a cramped office above the hardware store, across from a lawyer who looked barely older than my daughter. Her name was Clara Benton, pro bono counsel for community projects, with a brisk voice and a quick pen. "So," Clara said, tapping her notepad, "you want to create a charitable trust, the Martin Hart House. Purpose, to provide temporary shelter and recovery space for anyone in need. Am I understanding correctly?" I nodded, smoothing my skirt with damp palms. "Yes. I don't want it sold. I don't want it gutted into vacation condos. I want it protected, legally beyond my years." Clara pursed her lips. "It's possible. A trust can shield the property from developers, from creditors, even from heirs who disagree. But there's the matter of funding, insurance, upkeep, utilities. These places don't run on goodwill alone." The words stung. I thought of my pension, the slim balance in my checking account. "I could contribute some," I murmured, "but not nearly enough." For a moment, defeat pressed against my ribs. What good was vision if it collapsed under paperwork? Then I remembered the lockbox, the one that had yielded envelopes and deeds. I had only skimmed its contents, too shaken to study every document. That afternoon, I pulled it down again, spread the contents on the kitchen table, and there it was. An unassuming certificate of deposit, yellowed with time. Martin's name, my name, a date I hadn't noticed before. Maturity. This very month. I blinked, heart racing. The amount wasn't vast, but it was steady, enough to establish the trust and keep Gulsong breathing for years. Martin, always planning, always tucking away some quiet provision. The next day I sat across from Clara again, the certificate trembling in my hand. She grinned, stamping the papers with a satisfying thunk. Well then, congratulations. The Martin Harthouse Trust is born. I signed my name in deliberate strokes, the pen scratching against the paper, my pulse strong in my ears. For the first time since Martin's death, I felt something other than loss. I felt partnership, him still guiding me, still making sure the promise was possible. When I left Clara's office, I carried the folder close to my chest. On the cover, embossed in plain letters, were the words, "The Martin Harthouse Trust." It didn't glitter like Seabrook's brochures. And it never would. But it was real. It was ours. And it would stand. Maya came by in the late morning, the baby strapped snug against her chest, tiny fists curled in dreams. She stood on the porch for a long while before speaking, one hand resting on the weathered railing. "I overreacted," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "When I saw his things here, I thought you were choosing a stranger over your own daughter." I set down the brush I'd been using to scrape old paint from the steps. "You weren't wrong to feel that way. I should have told you. Keeping secrets from you, it was the same mistake your father made with me." "And it hurt you." Maya's eyes filled. "I've been so scared, Mom. The bills, the mortgage, diapers that disappear in a week, and some days I feel like I'm drowning. When you seemed to side with him instead of me, I panicked. I thought I was losing you, too." I crossed to her, touching her arm gently. "You'll never lose me, Maya. Not to Caleb, not to anyone. But you need to know I was wrong to shut you out. I thought I was protecting you from worry, but the truth is, I didn't trust you enough to share the weight. And that was unfair." Her chin trembled, but she gave a small nod. "I don't want to fight anymore." "Then let's not." I smiled faintly and held out a brush. "Help me repaint this old porch. It's long overdue." We worked side by side through the afternoon. The colour, sea blue, the shade Martin always insisted looked best against the shingles, spread fresh across the railing. The baby stirred once or twice, letting out a sigh as if the rhythm of our brushes lulled her back to sleep. Maya talked as she painted, halting at first, then more freely. She confessed her shame at nearly pushing me to sell Gulsong, her fear that she would never be able to give her child stability. I admitted how lonely I'd been since Martin's passing, how the secrecy of the letters had felt like both a gift and a wound. Somewhere between one post and the next, our words softened into laughter, remembering Martin's clumsy attempts at home repairs, the summer Maya painted her toenails, the exact same shade as the porch just to spite him. When we stepped back at last, flecks of blue in our hair and on our arms, the porch gleamed in the late sunlight, renewed. Maya leaned her head against my shoulder, the baby dozing between us. For the first time in a long while, I felt the bridge between us steady underfoot. Strong enough to carry us both, strong enough to carry us all. Yes. Caleb told me at breakfast, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, eyes steady but softer than I'd ever seen them. "It's time for me to go, Evelyn. The house is safe now. The trust. You've built what Martin asked. My part in this is finished." I wanted to argue. To tell him he was wrong, that he belonged here, that Gulsong had become warmer with his presence. But I saw the truth already written in his shoulders, in the way he kept glancing toward the window, as if measuring distance. "Where will you go?" I asked quietly. He smiled, a little wistful. Wherever someone needs a roof for a while. That was always the promise, to carry shelter forward. Your husband carried it to me. I carry it on. On the porch, a small suitcase leaned against the railing, but beside it sat something else, a plain black binder worn at the edges. These, Caleb said, setting it in my hands, are pledges from the recovery circle. People promising hours, meals, donations. A community forming around the house. You won't be alone in this, Evelyn. My throat tightened. I opened the binder just enough to glimpse neat signatures, notes scribbled in margins. I'll bring blankets. I can cook twice a week. Count me in. Each line was proof that Gullsong had grown larger than my grief, larger than Caleb himself. He reached into his pocket then and placed a seashell in my palm. A scallop shell polished smooth by the tide. Inside, inked in tiny, careful letters, were the 6 words that had begun all of this. He told me you'd keep your promise. I ran my finger along the fragile curve, the ink already softening into the ridges. You could stay, Caleb, I whispered. He shook his head gently. If I stay too long, I start building walls. And this was never meant to be about me. It's about the door always opening. He set down his mug, picked up his suitcase and shouldered it with practiced ease. We walked together to the end of the path. The gulls cried overhead, the tide curling against the rocks. He turned, gave a little salute that made me laugh through tears, and then walked down the road until the curve of the dunes swallowed him. I closed my fingers around the shell, the words pressing faintly into my skin. Caleb had left, yes, but the promise remained, etched now into more than one life. Into mine, into the cottage, into everyone who would one day knock at this weathered blue door. The town hall smelled faintly of wet coats and coffee, the storm's memory still clinging to everyone who filed in. Folding chairs scraped against the wooden floor, whispers floating between neighbours who, for once, seemed bound together more by hope than suspicion. I clutched the binder Caleb had left me, though I doubted I would need to open it. The weight of the signatures alone steadied me. Seabrook's attorney stood again, crisp suit, slick voice, but his confidence had thinned. The storm and the seawall failure had cut deeper than any argument I could have made. Still, he tried. He spoke of progress, of modern living, of revenue streams. But as his words scattered through the room, I saw heads shaking, lips tightening. He was speaking into a wind that had already shifted. When my turn came, I rose slowly, feeling every eye in the room. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. 3 weeks ago, I began, I thought this cottage was just mine to lose or keep. But I've come to understand it was never only mine. My husband believed that, and now I see it too. Gullsong is a harbour, and harbours belong to everyone who needs one. I lifted the seashell Caleb had given me, its 6 words hidden inside. Promises outlast storms, and they outlast men in suits. This isn't just a fight for a piece of land. It's a fight for the right to keep our door open, for anyone who needs it. The chairwoman of the council nodded, lips pressed tight, and turned to the roll call. One by one, names were called. I. The sound clicked into place like stones across a river. A few nays, but the momentum was clear, unstoppable. When the final tally was read, the room seemed to exhale at once. Conservation easement. Approved. Seabrook Holdings, facing the storm of public anger and the wreck of their seawall, officially withdrew their proposal. The beach and the cottage would remain untouched, protected not by sentiment, but by law. Applause began scattered, uncertain, then grew, swelling against the rafters like a tide rising. Maya squeezed my hand hard enough to leave marks. I turned and found her eyes brimming with relief, with pride. She whispered, "We did it, Mom." I pulled her into my arms, the baby between us warm and alive. For the first time since Martin's death, I felt not just that I'd kept a promise, but that I'd made something new, something enduring. The gavel struck once more, sharp and certain, but the sound was nearly drowned in the rush of voices, neighbours greeting neighbours, strangers hugging like kin. We had saved Gull's song, and in saving it I realised we had saved one another. It was spring again, the kind that smells of salt and lilacs, the kind that coaxes gulls closer to the shore, as if they too were curious about new beginnings. A full year had passed since the council vote, since Seabrook folded its glossy brochures and retreated. Gullsong stood stronger than ever, painted fresh, its porch railings the same blue as the April sky. Maya came most weekends now, baby toddling at her side. The recovery circle had grown into something bigger, with neighbours stopping by even on quiet nights, leaving casseroles, quilts, or simply themselves. I'd begun to think of the cottage not as a home I was preserving, but as a living body, breathing, expanding, always ready to hold another heartbeat inside its walls. That morning I was arranging wildflowers in a chipped vase on the kitchen table when I heard it. 3 quick knocks at the door. Not the mailman, not Maya. Something in the rhythm made me pause. I set the vase down and wiped my hands on my apron, heart tapping a little faster. When I opened the weathered blue door, there she was. A young woman, no more than 25, with rain in her hair and a suitcase clutched to her chest. Her eyes were red, her lips trembling. She leaned forward and whispered 6 words I knew as if they were my own name. He told me you'd keep your promise. The world seemed to tilt, the same way it had that first dusk when Caleb stood on this porch. Only this time there was no shock, no suspicion, no scramble to decide. I simply felt the circle closing, smooth as the tide rolling in. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't ask what she was running from or toward. Some questions can wait, and some never need to be asked at all. Instead, I stepped aside and held the door wide. "Come in," I said gently. "There's tea on the stove and bread still warm." She stepped over the threshold, shoulders dropping with a kind of relief I remembered too well. The scent of wildflowers filled the kitchen as I guided her to the table. Later, I would hear her story. Later, she would find her place here, just as Caleb had, just as I had when I finally understood Martin's letters. But in that moment, I understood something simple, something final. We don't keep promises by clutching them tight. We keep them by opening the door again and again until the very act of shelter becomes the home itself. And so the gift lives on. What part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. If this story felt close to your heart, give it a like, subscribe if you want to be part of a space where real stories matter. Got a couple more minutes? Check out the next story. It's also about the things we rarely say out loud.